The first chill of autumn had settled over London, and with it came a silence that seemed to fill every corner of the apartment. Ethan woke early, as always, to the sound of the kettle clicking off and the faint creak of Daniel moving about the kitchen. Their mornings were orderly, predictable, a quiet choreography of habit. Daniel poured coffee, Ethan buttered toast, and they exchanged soft, polite words that carried more comfort than warmth. Love still existed between them, but it had thinned into something delicate, like paper, still whole, yet easy to tear. Ethan watched his husband from across the small table. Daniel's hair, once a wild mess of curls, was now neatly trimmed for work. His laughter, once spontaneous and loud, had become rare. Years ago, their mornings had been filled with teasing, touches, and lazy smiles. Now, it was as if they were careful not to disturb the stillness between them. When Daniel kissed him goodbye, it was gentle, brief, and entirely expected. The door closed softly, leaving Ethan alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of his own thoughts. At work, things felt different. There, life had rhythm and movement, a pulse that kept him tethered to something alive. And at the center of that energy was Adam. Adam was everything Daniel no longer seemed to be: carefree, spontaneous, a little reckless. He had joined the firm 2 years ago, a younger designer with an instinct for beauty and a confidence that made everyone turn their heads. Ethan had taken him under his wing professionally, though lately he wasn't sure who had been guiding whom. Their friendship began with shared deadlines and late nights over coffee, swapping music recommendations and stories from their lives. Adam's laughter was effortless, it filled the sterile office air with warmth. Sometimes, Ethan caught himself looking at him a moment too long, wondering if he saw something familiar in Adam's easy charm, something he'd lost sight of in himself. One afternoon, as they worked side by side on a new campaign, Adam turned to him and said, "You know, Ethan, you never really talk about yourself." Ethan smiled without looking up. "There's not much to tell. Everyone's got a story," Adam said softly. "You just don't want to tell yours." That sentence stayed with Ethan longer than it should have. It wasn't flirtation, it was something deeper, an unexpected truth cutting through his guarded quiet. That evening, when he got home, Daniel was already there, sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. The television played softly, a low murmur that filled the room but not the space between them. "How was work?" Daniel asked, not looking up. "Fine." "Busy," Ethan replied. They both smiled faintly, like actors repeating well-practiced lines. Ethan felt the weight of everything unsaid, the love that had settled into routine, the closeness that had become comfortable distance. He wasn't unhappy, exactly. Just, untethered. Some nights, he lay awake listening to Daniel breathe, wondering if contentment was supposed to feel this quiet, this numb. A few days later, the company announced a major presentation, one that required long evenings of preparation. Ethan and Adam volunteered to lead it together. It made sense professionally, but part of him knew there was something else pulling him toward those hours after dark, those quiet spaces where conversation could drift beyond work. That Thursday, they decided to work from Ethan's apartment. Adam arrived with a laptop and a bottle of wine, joking that it might make spreadsheets tolerable. They set up in the living room, the city humming outside the rain-speckled windows. For hours, they talked through ideas, laughed over bad fonts, argued over color palettes. The tension that had always been subtle now felt tangible, humming quietly beneath their laughter. At one point, Adam leaned over Ethan's shoulder to look at the screen. Ethan caught the faint scent of his cologne, fresh, understated, and felt his chest tighten. Their hands brushed. A tiny, ordinary moment, but it lingered longer than it should have. Adam didn't move away immediately. Neither did Ethan. Their eyes met, briefly, searchingly, and then both looked back at the glowing monitor, pretending the silence wasn't charged with meaning. When the clock struck midnight, Adam stood and stretched, smiling. "We should probably call it a night before we start mixing up passion and pixels." Ethan laughed softly, though his throat felt dry. "Yeah, good idea." After Adam left, the apartment felt heavier than before. The faint scent of wine and aftershave still lingered in the air. Ethan sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker against the rain-soaked glass. He told himself it was just friendship, that nothing had changed, but as the night deepened, he couldn't ignore the pulse of something new, something dangerous and alive, stirring quietly beneath the life he'd built. That night, Ethan realized desire doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes, it begins with silence, soft, patient, and impossible to ignore. Rain had been falling since afternoon, steady and unrelenting. By nightfall, London streets gleamed under the amber streetlights, puddles reflecting fragments of passing headlights. Ethan stood by his window, watching droplets slide down the glass. Daniel had left that morning for a short business trip, 3 days away. The apartment felt unusually large, its quiet unsettling rather than peaceful. He told himself he would use the time to rest, maybe catch up on work. But when Adam's text arrived, "Still on for tonight. We should finalize the client deck." Ethan didn't hesitate before replying yes. By the time Adam arrived, the storm outside had thickened into a heavy downpour. He shook off his coat, grinning, damp hair sticking to his forehead. "Your place always smells like coffee and cedar," Adam said, glancing around. "Comforting." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's Daniel's doing. He likes things neat, predictable." They worked side by side, the rhythmic tapping of rain blending with the quiet hum of their laptops. A small lamp cast a warm pool of light over the table. Music played softly in the background, an old playlist Ethan had forgotten existed, one filled with songs he and Daniel once shared. Hours passed easily. They joked, argued gently over design choices, laughed until their sides ached. The kind of laughter that feels effortless, that erases the clock's ticking. Ethan poured them each a glass of wine, and Adam lifted his in mock ceremony. To the best creative team in the building, he said. Ethan clinked his glass against Adam's. And the most overworked. The wine softened the edges of everything. Their conversation drifted from clients to childhoods, from dreams to disappointments. Adam spoke about his recent breakup, how it had left him feeling both free and hollow. Ethan listened, genuinely moved by his openness. When Adam looked up, his expression was unguarded, his voice quiet. You ever feel like you're living a life that looks perfect but doesn't feel like yours? Ethan hesitated before answering. Every day. Something unspoken settled between them, delicate and dangerous. The rain grew heavier, its sound filling the silence that followed. Adam's gaze lingered on him, searching, uncertain. When Adam's hand brushed Ethan's as he reached for the mouse, neither moved. The contact was brief but electric, too innocent to be intentional, too intimate to be ignored. Ethan's breath caught, his pulse quickening in his throat. He wanted to step back, to restore the safe distance that friendship demanded, but the space between them had already shifted. Adam's voice was soft. Ethan looked up. The room seemed smaller now, the air charged. We shouldn't, he whispered. I know, Adam said. But I can't stop thinking about you. The honesty in those words stripped away every barrier Ethan had built. For a moment, they stood suspended in a quiet that seemed infinite. Then, almost imperceptibly, they moved toward each other. The kiss was hesitant, trembling, full of fear and want in equal measure. Ethan's heart pounded as though he were being both punished and freed. When they pulled apart, Adam's eyes were glistening. I'm sorry, he said. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. Sorry for what? For crossing a line, or for how natural it had felt. They kissed again, longer this time, slower, a wordless confession of everything they had been denying. Ethan felt the ache of years of quiet longing, of being unseen and untouched in ways that mattered. The world beyond that room disappeared, the storm, the city, Daniel, everything faded into a single, impossible moment. Later, they sat side by side on the couch, both silent, both afraid to break the fragile stillness that had settled. The glow of the lamp painted their faces in soft gold. Adam traced his finger along the rim of his glass. This doesn't have to mean anything, he said quietly. Ethan looked at him, voice low. But it already does. Neither of them spoke again. When Adam finally stood to leave, his eyes lingered for a heartbeat longer than goodbye required. Then the door closed, and the sound of rain filled the space he'd left behind. Ethan sank into the couch, feeling the echo of Adam's warmth on his skin. He wanted to feel guilt, but all he felt was an unbearable clarity, the realization that he had wanted this for longer than he'd admitted. He walked to the window. The storm had begun to ease, leaving the city shining and still. Somewhere in that quiet, he felt the weight of what he'd done settle over him, not as regret, but as something deeper, irrevocable. He whispered into the silence, there's no going back now. And as the rain slowed to a drizzle, Ethan understood, some boundaries, once crossed, do not break, they redefine everything that comes after. The morning light crept across the apartment like a truth that couldn't be ignored. It filtered through the blinds in thin, accusing lines, tracing its way across the counter where the wine glasses still sat, half empty, still glistening from the night before. The air smelled faintly of rain and something heavier, something unspoken. Ethan woke early, though he wasn't sure he'd ever truly slept. His mind replayed every moment in fragments, the candlelight, the warmth of Lucas's hand, the silence that had followed. Now, in daylight, it all felt fragile, like a secret already threatening to collapse under its own weight. He moved quietly through the kitchen, afraid of sound. Every small noise, a clink of a spoon, the hiss of boiling water, seemed amplified in the stillness. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching the slow rise of steam. The first sip burned his tongue. He welcomed it. Pain, at least, was certain. Lucas appeared a few minutes later, barefoot, hair slightly tousled, wearing a plain t-shirt that somehow made him look more unfamiliar than ever. He paused in the doorway, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Morning, Ethan said finally, voice low. Hey, Lucas murmured. He hesitated, then poured himself coffee. His hands were steady, his eyes were not. They stood across from each other like strangers at a crime scene, both aware of what had been taken and what couldn't be returned. I didn't mean for last night to happen, Ethan said. The words were flat but honest. Lucas nodded slowly. Neither did I. He looked up then, eyes soft but steady. But I don't regret it, Ethan. I can't. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, the confession landing heavier than he expected. That makes it harder. I know. They let the silence stretch again, both clinging to it as if words might shatter what little calm remained. The front door clicked open suddenly. Daniel's voice filled the hallway. Ethan? Power back yet? Ethan froze. He hadn't expected Daniel home until Sunday. The scent of his cologne, sharp, expensive, seemed to slice through the air. Lucas set his cup down quietly and stepped back. I'll be in my room, he whispered, slipping away before Daniel appeared. Daniel entered, brushing rain from his jacket. God, it's freezing out. Missed you, he said, leaning in for a quick kiss that Ethan couldn't quite return. His arms wrapped around Ethan's shoulders, but the gesture felt rehearsed, out of rhythm. You're home early, Ethan managed, flight got bumped. Figured I'd surprise you. Daniel smiled, though his eyes stayed on his phone. Everything okay here? You look tired. I didn't sleep much, Ethan said, which wasn't a lie. Daniel wandered around the living room, complaining about traffic, about work, about how the power outage had messed up his hotel plans. He didn't notice the tension in Ethan's shoulders or the faint tremor in his voice. Lucas emerged briefly to grab his keys. Morning, Daniel, he said, polite but distant. Daniel nodded, barely looking up. Hey, man. When Lucas left, the door shut with a soft finality. The quiet that followed was unbearable. Ethan watched Daniel unpack his suitcase, the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. The motions were familiar but void of intimacy. Something inside Ethan cracked, not anger, not relief, but something quieter. Acceptance. That afternoon, when Daniel left for a meeting, Ethan found Lucas sitting on the building's back steps, a cigarette burning low between his fingers though he wasn't smoking it. I can't stay here, Lucas said, not looking up. It's not fair, to either of us. Ethan sat beside him, the cold metal railing biting at his palms. I know. I wouldn't ask you to. Lucas glanced at him then, eyes tired but kind. I meant what I said this morning. I don't regret you. Even if I should. Ethan managed a small, pained smile. Maybe we both needed a reminder that we still feel. Maybe. Lucas flicked the cigarette away. You'll figure things out with him. Ethan exhaled, the breath shaky. Or I won't. But I'll stop pretending it's working. When Lucas stood, Ethan didn't stop him. Their goodbye was wordless, a touch on the shoulder, a lingering look that carried both gratitude and grief. Then Lucas walked away, disappearing into the thinning mist of late morning. Inside, the apartment felt hollow but honest for the first time in months. Daniel returned that evening, full of stories and plans, but Ethan's responses were slow, detached. That night, while Daniel slept beside him, Ethan packed a small bag and sat in the dark living room until sunrise. That he didn't leave immediately, not that day, but something inside him already had. Weeks later, after Lucas had moved out and Daniel had stopped asking questions, Ethan found a note slipped between the pages of a book they'd once talked about reading together. You deserve light that doesn't come from a storm. That he read it twice, then smiled, sadly, quietly. Sometimes, he thought, love doesn't die in a fight, it fades in silence, and sometimes, what begins as a mistake is simply the truth finding its way through the dark.